Shalom and welcome to Life Lessons number 28 from the beginning of the 5 books of Moses. This is the 28th section known as Parshat Metzorah, the section of Metzorah. We are also in the book of Leviticus, and it is the 5th section in Leviticus, as mentioned before, Parashat Metzorah. It continues with the theme of the previous section that spoke about leprosy. And the idea of leprosy, as we explained, is more connected with a spiritual leprosy, because this is the closest thing that we connect it with. That's why we call it leprosy or the leper, but really it's much more than that. As we saw earlier on, the previous section spoke about that when a person sees a disease on his body or on his clothing, it doesn't say, and especially when it talks about a disease on the body, it doesn't say that you should go see a doctor. It says you should go see the priest. That's already telling us that we're not talking just about some kind of a malady that you need to seek, or a doctor or a natural doctor. No, it's talking about the priest, because obviously the priest has received instruction going back to Moses in our Torah, directed from God, how exactly to deal with it. And we see there's a lot of steps here. If the disease had spread, the individual has to be secluded, needs to leave the camp. This is when they were in the desert, and there was the camp of the priest, the camp of the Levites, and the camp of the Israelites. So he has to go beyond all the camps and be secluded. And there's a whole system here, 1 week, 2 weeks, till it starts the purification of rehabilitation, of getting better. And this is where we come to our section, where in the beginning it speaks about the process after the person has been cured. In order to be accepted back into the community, there's a whole set of sacrifices that needs to happen. But in order that that should happen, again, the priest comes in and he is going to declare that the person is free of the disease, and then he is welcome. So first, let's try to understand something about what's going on here, because in the previous section spoke about a disease on the body of the person, then spoke about the skin, the beard, then the clothing, and then in our section over here that begins with chapter 14 in Leviticus speaks about the purification, and then interesting enough it introduces another one, and that is if the tsaras, that's the Hebrew name for this disease called tsaras, where a lot of people translate as leprosy, and I just said it cannot be the regular leprosy, it's more connected, more of a spiritual leprosy, as we soon going to explain. Talks about where on the walls of the house the person sees signs, there's some kind of affliction that are on the walls, and then the priest has to be called in to deal with it. Okay, so the famous Maimonides, that we're going to base our talk on it, on what he has to say, says something very interesting. It's based on what the Talmud has to tell us. In the times when we were more spiritual, what does it mean we were more spiritual? It means to say that the physicality of the world that we find ourselves wasn't such an obstacle. In our times, as we find ourselves, many times, as much as we want to be spiritual, and in the word spiritual I mean to connect to the divine, to connect to God, but there's many obstacles. From wanting till actually doing it, sometimes could be very hard. The time doesn't allow it, or the environment doesn't allow it, whatever the situation is, it only represents that we are not in such a high level of connection to our divinity the way it was many, many years ago. According to our sages, we actually have gone down from the high level of connection to God that it was earlier on, going back to temple time. Temple time, there was such a thing that you bring sacrifices in the temple where the relationship with God was more in a higher level. They say a famous joke or story that they say that years ago the Prime Minister of Israel was visiting the United States and was having a conversation with the President of the United States, and they were talking about the relationship about God, and the story goes that the President says, when things are very tough, things are very hard, we try whatever we could, and also we turn to God. We ask God for help. And the way he expresses himself, he says, well, the only thing is that to connect to God, it may be a long distance call, because God is so far from us, so we don't see it, so beyond us. And where the story goes, the Prime Minister of Israel says, well, come to Israel, because by us it's a local call. So, in other words, it depends what the relationship with God is. Is it a long distance call, or is it a local call? When it is a local call, means when the person feels more spiritual. And that could come out in many different ways how we do things. In a very simple level, when a person opens a prayer book and he's praying to God, how is the feeling when you're praying to God? Is it that something that it is distance and you're trying hard to connect? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but you do not feel like it's right here in front of you. That is more of a long distance call. But sometimes could be, and I'm using the example of prayers, when a person is praying and he feels connected, it's working. Your prayers have an automatic benefit and connection. So the same thing is, if we go back to what it says in the earlier days, going back to the times of the temple, or from when after God gave the Torah on Mount Sinai, the relationship with God was more in a closer way. What does it mean closer way? It was more revealed. After the destruction of the temple and the dispersion of our ancestors all over the world, it's written, it has become less of an obvious connection. That will explain a lot of things, how we've been persecuted all these years, because the revelation of God was not so clear. When things are very clear, so then we could almost say we are untouchable. If we are touchable, means because the sparks or the relation with God is not apparent, so allows others to start up with us and to do terrible things that we have seen throughout the generations. So that is in a one way of to look on it, that going back many generations ago, it was clear cut. The God of Israel, the people of Israel, the relationship, and it was a two-way relationship. As we would say, it was a privilege to be the people of God, and the same thing was a big responsibility. So when you get the privilege, with that you also have the responsibility, but it worked, and therefore, and that's the point that I'm trying to bring out, and therefore, if there was a little bit of a mess up, it was right away noticeable. So let's say, for example, if an individual that is in a strong and in a healthy relationship, let's say spouses, and everything is wonderful. So you could assume you see spouses, husband and wife, smiling, they have a good life, everyone is looking on them, they say, wow, that's a good example. We could learn from them. And many times we know for ourselves, if when things go a little bit wrong, because we're human beings, so always there could be an argument, there could be a fight. The nature of human beings is that it's most of the times right away noticeable. If, let's say, we'll go by a few days that the spouses are not talking to each other because for some silly reason, whatever it to be, it's easy for friends to right away know to say, something is wrong. What's the matter with you? Your face looks different. Something has happened. Because we see that things connect automatically. Unless we're such a professional actors that we could hide everything. But most of the time, not necessarily. It comes out. So when things are good and everything is going well, so we smile and we could say jokes and we look good. But if, God forbid, things are no good, or it's not good at home because you're in a fighting mood or something is wrong, or even things could be well at home, but at the job where you're working, things are not working out. It's automatically, we could see on the person, they're not happy. And the reason why they're not happy, because something has happened that is disturbing the day-by-day peace and tranquility. Now, if we translate that a little bit stronger, because if it is so in our day-by-day life that silly things, or more than silly things, could disrupt a day-by-day life and make us sad, and the opposite, make us happy when things are good, imagine if we are serious in our relationship with the Almighty. If we are serious in our relationship with the Almighty, it should be very effective. That if we feel good, I prayed today to the Almighty, and God has responded. I'm doing well, and I'm thanking God for everything that He's doing with me. So then the relationship with God is apparent in this individual. What some people may say, this fanatic religious person, but that's not what I mean. You don't have to be fanatic, but you have to be, if you're a believer and you believe in God, that He doesn't just say in the abstract. We could see in that individual, he's happy about his relationship with Almighty. And it is also a two-way relationship. So in other words, even though, because this is so different than the day-by-day or the problems at home or the problems in the job, for example, or not being happy sometimes with the performance of our children. But all this are clear-cut. When we talk about God, a lot of belief is demanded here because you don't see. You don't see. It's something that you don't see. However, your belief, your faith and belief is so strong till, as we say in English, you could say, I see it. You know, a lot of times in a discussion, you're having a discussion about something, not necessarily you see that discussion, but there is that statement in English, you learn something, you understood it, and then you say, I see it. Well, you see it. Not necessarily you see it, but it's so clear till you see it. So many times, if our relationship with the Almighty is in a very high level, that we live it, as we would say 24/7, then I see it, even though technically speaking I don't see it, but I really could see it. So they tell us, in the olden days, going back earlier on, going back to Mount Sinai, it was very apparent, that relationship. And this is what the verse says in the book of Deuteronomy. It says about the Holy Land, about Israel. It says, this is a land where the eyes of God are upon it from beginning of the year till the end of the year. In other words, the divine providence of God is apparent all the time. When all of a sudden things become a little bit darker, and not so much because of the Almighty, sometimes because of us, we have caused it by the way we are doing things, or the way we became weaker in our belief, that all of a sudden the relationship has dimmed, has become a little bit concealed. When it becomes a little bit concealed, it allows outside interference, and then that's when the mess up starts. So tells us the Maimonides something very interesting. One of the biggest problems that we face as human beings is the problem of gossip. In Hebrew it's called Lashon Hara, the evil tongue, and that has many different levels. It could be to say things that are true, but by saying it and repeating it to other people about somebody else, even it may be the truth, but you just caused harm. There's no reason for it. And of course, if it's a bunch of lies that a person is creating about somebody else. So the idea of gossiping is a terrible thing. It causes friction, causes fights, and nobody is safe from it. Even great people that says that maybe could be in a high level, but somehow to stay away from gossip is something very, very hard. So tells us the Maimonides as follows. In the time when the relationship with God was in a very strong way, so then physically speaking, when I do something that it is not what God wants from me, it had an effect on my body automatically. So therefore he says, the idea of this saras, this leprosy, this spiritual disease that we're talking about, was a result because I have done something wrong. So therefore my body is sending me a message. The same as, physically speaking, when something goes wrong in our body, we see it right away. There's a pimple, there's a spot, there's things that you need to find out what it is, and then you start with the creams, and with this, and with that, and all the things that we do. Now they tell us that, spiritually speaking, if the person has gossiped in the olden days, it was right away a statement on the person's body. So a person wakes up in the morning, looks on his hand, and there's some spots, and then in the good days, a person could say to himself, who did I gossip yesterday about? What did I do wrong? So it was a kind of a reminder. So it's not a punishment, as it's important to understand that the idea of punishment is in the Torah is not just to punish the person, but it's also a deterrence, or to help the person to get back. Deterrence is something very important, because as much as we think that we do not need to have anyone telling us what to do, and we are mature enough to figure out what's right and wrong, we know very well that if there wouldn't have been no police force and no power of authority, as much as we think we are the greatest people in the world, but somehow not necessarily we would follow everything 100%. Just for the sake of the discussion, to give a simple example, if in something that we all maybe could have a little bit of a feeling for it, we know there's the laws of speeding when you drive, and we know that if we get stopped speeding, we're going to get a ticket. And if we get quite a few of them, the license may even get suspended. Now let's say, because we are all of us great people, and let's say we say, you know what, we don't need any authority to watch us. The fact itself that I drive and I see a sign, 55, 65 is the speed, you could rely we will never pass that speed. If, for example, we know that there's nobody there to check it, we could almost guarantee that the amount or the level of people speeding will start to rise very quickly. That's the way that it is human nature. So as great as we are, somewhere there in the back of our minds, there needs to be some kind of a deterrence to help us and guide us to be in the right way. So the same thing is when it comes with the idea when the Torah says, be careful, do this and this, if not, you may get punished. The idea of punishment is not because God got angry with us and therefore He needs to give us a slap in the face because we misbehaved. That's not the idea. The idea is because He loves us so much and He wants us to do the right things. Therefore, there is these commandments to help us to go in the right way. So on the times when the relationship was clear and there was no obstacles, it was apparent, the unity between the individual and God, so it was possible, and it was that way, that if a person gossiped, he felt it. And that was right away a statement to the person that they need to get back. And the one that's going to help them is the priest, and there was a whole system that's going to happen. So Maimonides says that's why there's an order of things. Because not right away it goes to the skin of the person, to hurt the body. The first thing is, he says, was on the houses. The person that gossiped, so the first thing is there was signs on the walls. All of a sudden, this kind of discoloration on the walls, and that's the beginning. If this didn't help, there was discoloration on the clothing. If this didn't help, then it went to the body of the person. What's interesting about all that is that since after the destruction of the temple, that as the Kabbalah says, that light of God has become concealed, and therefore unfortunately is that when we transgress, not necessarily we hear the scream and the yell, hey, don't do it. Before, we're able to hear. It's like almost the child as they're growing up and you have the parents that are educating them on every step and they tell them, don't do this, don't do that. And then comes a certain situation later on where we think we have matured and then we are on our own. But the idea is that we got such a good education that don't need any more the parents to stand there and tell us every step of the way because we know it. And soon we become responsible to give it over to the next generation. Here, it was almost the same that we were on such a level that almost God is standing there on every step of the way in a revealed way, not in a concealed way. And then later on, after the destruction of the temple, things have changed. And therefore, we don't have this anymore. That if a person gossips, all of a sudden they realize this on their bodies. So it's like almost in a nostalgic ways to say, I kind of hope that these laws of leprosy come back, because that will show that the relationship with the Almighty is so strong that I feel it. So if I did something wrong, it's not something that I have to wonder, did I cross the line? Did I do something wrong? It's right away. Oh, my foot hurts, so must be I've done something wrong with my foot, spiritually speaking. So this is very powerful in a deeper way about what's going on in this parasha, in this section. Now, the individual that God has appointed to take care of this was the priest, the Kohanim. The Kohanim were known as very kind people. And because they were kind people, so therefore they could deal with this in a kind way. But a lot has to do that the goal is that the individual should understand what went wrong and they should fix the situation. When we talk about fixing the situation, there's always two ways of doing it. Now, when we're talking about when a person realizes that something went wrong, so he has to take care of it. When the person has to take care of it, so one is, it's kind of force from above. He got a disease, he got a leprosy, that's giving him a message, kind of forcing the situation. If not that, I wouldn't even know there's a problem. I didn't know it was a problem. All of a sudden I know there's a problem. Then there is where I transform the situation. Now I'm taking, after I dealt with the problem, because right now when I have patches all over me with discolorations and this, I need to deal with it. But then comes when I take it into me when I am secluded to deal with the situation. But the idea is to transform the negative into positive. There's a famous line in the prophets where they say, when darkness will be transformed into light. Sometimes we say dark is the opposite of light. When it's not light, there's dark. Sometimes we say stronger. You can't sweep away the darkness. You can't sweep away the darkness. What we could do is bring in more light. The more light you bring in, you transform the darkness into light. And that's really the deeper meaning of this whole section. So that gives us the strength that whatever situation we find ourselves, number one is to deal with the problem, and then we could work on transforming it into to be much better, and very soon we'll merit the ultimate redemption, the Karov Mamash. Thank you. Okay.